the U.S. is still a very powerful and influential country in the hemisphere. You know, part of its influence is through the media. It influences the international media. It can create false impressions of all kinds of things. You know, most of what you showed on this show is true, but a lot of what you see in the media about Venezuela has been grossly exaggerated for years. The reporting when the economy was booming between 2002 and 2008 was very much like it is now. Everything was supposedly on the verge of collapse. It was bad news all the time, every day. And, you know, you still have this now. You have, you know, look at the debt, for example. In January of last year, they said that Venezuela had a 68% chance, and that was the markets too, you know, of defaulting on its debt. Well, that year has gone, within a year, that year has gone by, they didn't default. They probably won't default this year either. And so you have that. You have the media reporting that there's a 70 or 80% poverty rate in Venezuela. Totally ridiculous. There's nobody, no economist I know that believes that. So even though the news is uniformly bad, they still have to make it worse. And so this is part of the United States effort. That's where they can be blamed. I'm the last person who's going to say the government is off the hook for, you know, their economic mistakes that have led to the crisis. They made mistakes. And the same is true in Brazil, by the way, which is even more self-inflicted in than Venezuela, the recession, that is. But, you know, someone mentioned that the rule of law, you have rule of law in Brazil. Well, you have a guy the judge who's leading the investigation against the government, who, you know, had the former president detained, called 200 police, notified the media in advance, and put on a whole show, and then released wiretaps of the president talking to, you know, Dilma talking to Lula, Lula talking to his kids and his lawyer. I mean, this is not an impartial judiciary by any means in Brazil either. So what you have is, you know, people who are taking advantage of the downturn to remove these governments through an unconstitutional process. And I think that is what you've seen repeatedly. And, you know, in 2013, for example, there was absolutely no doubt about who won the presidential election. And yet the United States was the only government in the world who refused to recognize that results until it was forced to by the OAS and everybody else in Brazil, and everybody piled on. So you have a constant attempt to delegitimize this government, to take advantage of the economic crisis, and if they don't get this, you know, if they want to get rid of this government through extra legal means, this is what I'm worried about. They will get support in Washington, because Washington is already supporting them with the sanctions, with the millions of dollars, and with the media effort. They tried to delegitimize this last election. They had a whole campaign. Let me just finish this one point, because it is, after all, 3 against 1 here, as is typical, you know, on these shows. Not on this particular station, which in the past you've had more balanced debate. But, you know, look at the last election in Venezuela. You had a huge campaign in the international media, which of course always spills into the Venezuelan media, to delegitimize the parliamentary election, led by the head of the OAS, who was doing it for the United States, you know, and saying that the election was going to be a fraud. And what happened? The opposition won a 2/3 majority in the assembly, and the government conceded before the votes were even counted. So, you know, this is the kind of thing where you're going to see this all the time, and you have to be really careful of what you're listening to in the media, because it's always just one side of the story.